Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Miliasi. Here I would like to tell you about consecutive and simultaneous interpretation. What is the both definition? Simultaneous interpretation is defined as the process of interpreting into the target language at the same time as the source language is being delivered, while consecutive interpretation is defined as the process of interpreting after the speaker or signer has completed one or more ideas in the source language and pauses while the interpreter transmits that information. Interpreting, whether simultaneous or consecutive, is a highly complex discourse interchange where language perception, comprehension, translation, and production operation are carried out virtually in parallel. This is the content of in the PowerPoint. The first we will discuss about consecutive and simultaneous interpreting. The second, the role of consecutive interpreting in the education of interpreters. And the third, myths and perception. The fourth, models of interpreting and their role in consecutive interpreting. And the five, consecutive and simultaneous interpreting in legal context. And the six, deciding factors in the use of consecutive interpreting. And the seven, implication for our field. And the last one is conclusion. Okay, this is summarized the common features of the models which apply to both consecutive and simultaneous interpreting according Humphrey and Alcorn 1995. And the first point is the interpreter takes in search adherence. And B point, lexical and semantic units are strung together and held until the interpreter has sufficient units to determine the meaning of what is being said or signed. And C point, a string of lexical and semantic units referred to as a chunk is analyzed to identify the speaker's or signer's intent, the communication goals, explicit and implicit ideas, and a multitude of sociolinguistic features that impact upon the meaning of the search utterance. And the last point is cultural and linguistic equivalents are such. Observing cultural norms and the cultural overlays of meaning and etc. And move to point 2 about the role of consecutive interpreting in the education of interpreters by investigating the programs of study offered by interpreter education sites. It can be seen that approaches to teaching the cognitive models of interpreting in the curricula vary greatly. And move to what is the myth and perception. Not only some interpreter education programs that dismiss the importance of consecutive interpreting, there are interpreters and consumers who also hold a number of myths and misperceptions that discount the effectiveness of consecutive interpretation. For example, one of the prevailing myths in the field is that if an interpreter interprets consecutively, it is an indication that she is less skilled than an interpreter who uses simultaneous interpretation. There are models of interpreting and their role in consecutive interpreting. First, namely assess contextual factors and monitor process. and the second, comprehend search language message, and the third, apply contextual and linguistic schemas and select simultaneous or consecutive interpreting, and the fourth, formulate equivalent message, and the last one is produce target language interpretation. Move to consecutive and simultaneous interpreting in legal context. The study use is a factorial design and manipulated on independent variable. For mock trials were conducted with 4 ASL English interpreters. The interpreters worked in team of 2 and participated in all 3 courtroom events. And this is a criteria for the interpreters were chosen from 4 areas of Canada. And the first criteria is interpreters needed to be experienced practitioners who were identified by the interpreting and deaf communities as interpreters respected for their interpreting skills in a variety of settings. And the second criteria is interpreters holding national certification were preferred. Association of Visual Language Interpreters of Canada or Certificate of Interpretation. And the last criteria is interpreters had a minimum of 500 hours of interpreting in a legal setting. And next, deciding factors in the use of consecutive interpreting. In Canada, revealed that consecutive interpreting is typically being used in several types of assignment, and the setting itself appears to be one of the determinants for choosing to interpret consecutively. For example, 6 out of 15 interpreting programs graduates report that while on practicum, their practicum mentors had modeled the use of consecutive interpreting and encourage its use in one-to-one and small group settings. And most educator reported that they used consecutive interpreting in their own work as interpreters and used the following variable in making the decision. The first is complexity and density of information. Second, setting one-to-one interaction where the discourse frame lends itself to natural chunking of information for consecutive work. And the third, consumers' non-conventional use of sign language. And the fourth, consumer is a child. And the five, consequences of interpreting errors are grave. And the sixth, when working with a deaf interpreter. And the seventh, one educator add an additional factor when she did not know the participant well and the newness of the situation or information was challenging for her. And this is implication for our field. There are several opportunities that emerge for the profession from recent research on consecutive interpreting. The first is educators and students have opportunities to explore methods of integrating research into the classroom. bringing new awareness of the role of cognitive models of interpreting and of consecutive interpreting as part of the critical skill set that interpreters require throughout their careers. And the second, as the field changes, we have opportunities to examine our curriculum and the language we use to describe consecutive interpreting to students, practitioners, and consumers. And the last material of this PowerPoint is conclusion. The first conclusion is this chapter has examined some of the models of interpreting which provide insight into the nature of the interpreting process and has emphasized the need to use such models when learning how to interpret. And the second, it is clear from the literature that there are advantages to teaching consecutive interpreting as a distinct skill set that will be needed throughout the career of a sign language interpreter. And the third, preliminary result from the study of courtroom interpreting demonstrate that interpreters can and do successfully employ both consecutive and simultaneous interpreting within an interpreted event. And the fourth, research supports the use of consecutive interpreting and emphasizes that the accuracy is higher when it is used. And the last, learning what constitutes effective practice in the field of spoken language and sign language interpreting is an avenue for further exploration. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.